There's a sound Kalos 9 makes before a storm. Nobody knew this at first. Not the survey drones, not the atmospheric readers, not the 17 automated probes the Galactic Survey Corps had launched into the upper stratosphere over the course of 4 decades of cautious, terrified observation. None of them had survived long enough to hear it more than once, and machines, for all their precision, have no real capacity for dread. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start the way my grandmother always told me to start, not at the moment everything changed, but just before it. In the last few seconds of quiet, when the universe still felt like it was holding its breath. My name is Senior Archivist Velsorik of the 3rd Branch, Interspecies Documentation Division. I'm Keth. You'd probably call us the tall gray ones with the extra set of elbows if you've seen us in any of the public broadcasts. We're known for our memory. We hold things carefully, we record things obsessively, and we almost never get surprised. I was surprised once. Only once. And it involved a human named Marcus Vale. I want to be clear from the beginning that this is not a story I expected to tell. When the GIRC assigned me to compile the Kalos 9 incident files, I assumed I was documenting a death. A statistically unusual death, perhaps. Humans had a way of making even their endings complicated, but a death nonetheless. Kalos 9 had a kill record that stretched back longer than most civilizations had been writing things down. It killed everything. That was, in a very real sense, its entire identity. The planet had consumed 4 survey teams, 2 fully automated research stations, 1 courier vessel that wandered too close to the magnetosphere, 1 Veth military scout who'd landed on a bet, and approximately 11,000 years of accumulated Galactic Survey Corps hope that something, eventually, could survive there long enough to gather useful data. Nothing did. Until Marcus Vale walked out of a damaged drop pod with a broken collarbone, 17% suit integrity, and what witnesses later described as an expression of mild irritation. Not terror, not despair. Irritation. Like he'd spilled something on himself and was already calculating how to clean it up. Before I tell you what happened on Kalos 9, I need to make sure you understand what Kalos 9 was. Because if you don't understand the world, you can't understand why the galaxy collectively lost its mind when Marcus Vale didn't die in it. Kalos 9 is the 4th planet in the Kalos system, which sits near the outer edge of the Vest Corridor, a region of space that most spacefaring civilizations have historically gone around rather than through, because the corridor has a way of doing unpleasant things to navigation arrays. Kalos 9 itself is roughly 1.3 times Earth's diameter. Gravity runs about 1.1 standard. Atmosphere is breathable by most carbon-based life, but laced with spore compounds that cause neurological disruption in species with certain receptor types. Keth, for example, cannot spend more than 40 minutes on the surface unfiltered before our secondary cognition begins to degrade. Veth can manage about 2 hours. Sorani can manage 6, but their color vision goes first, then their balance. Humans, and this was noted in the initial exposure studies, appear to experience only a mild headache, and what one test subject described as feeling like he'd drunk 3 glasses of something strong on an empty stomach. They recover fully within 4 hours of leaving the atmosphere. This is relevant. This is, in fact, extremely relevant, though nobody in the assembly understood why it was relevant until it was far too late to pretend otherwise. But the spore compounds were the least of Kalos 9 problems. They were in the grand taxonomy of things that could kill you on that planet, approximately in the middle of the list. The top of the list was occupied by the wildlife. Kalos 9 biosphere had evolved under conditions that would make most evolutionary biologists weep quietly into their data pads. The planet sits in a variable star system. Its sun goes through irregular cycles of intense radiation output, which means that every few thousand years, Kalos 9 gets bathed in enough hard radiation to sterilize most of its surface. Life there didn't evolve to be comfortable. Life there evolved to be impossible to kill. The Veth Research Division sent their best xenobiologists in the 3rd survey decade, before they lost the station. Those xenobiologists produced a catalog that is, to this day, considered essential reading in advanced xenobiology programs across the galaxy, mostly because it reads like a document written by people who were slowly realizing they had made a catastrophic mistake. I'm going to read you some of their entries. Not to frighten you, to give you context. Entry 7, Species Catalog. Designation, Graveback. Classification, Megafauna Predator Primary. The graveback is the apex predator of the Kalos 9 surface ecosystem. It masses between 4 and 7 metric tons, depending on age and subspecies. Its exoskeletal plating is composed of a mineralized compound similar to basalt that has, in controlled testing, deflected standard-issue Veth military pulse rounds at close range. The graveback hunts by seismic detection. It reads ground vibration through sensory organs in its feet with sufficient precision to distinguish between the movement pattern of prey and non-prey at distances up to 4 kilometers. It does not have eyes in any configuration we would recognize. It does not need them. Its hearing range extends into frequencies well beyond our sensor array's initial calibration point, which is why Survey Station 2's early warning system failed to trigger before the attack. The graveback appears to communicate with others of its kind through subsonic pulses that we cannot fully decode. We have observed pack-coordinated hunting behavior. We have observed what appears to be grief behavior following the death of pack members. We strongly recommend no further surface contact with graveback population zones. Note added at Survey Day 71. There appear to be no zones on the primary survey continent that are not graveback population zones. Entry 14, Species Catalog. Designation, Thread Viper. Classification, Mesofauna Predator Ambush. The thread viper averages 1.2 meters in length. Its body is capable of compressing to approximately 3 millimeters in diameter, which allows it to pass through gaps in environmental suits, cooling vents, equipment seals, and similar entry points. It detects body heat with extreme sensitivity. Its neurotoxin causes cardiac arrest in Veth physiology within approximately 11 seconds of injection. We have not yet determined an effective countermeasure. We have lost 3 researchers to thread viper encounters, despite full Level 4 biosafety protocols. Note added at Survey Day 88, thread vipers appear to be curious. Researcher Hallam noted before his passing that one had followed him for approximately 40 minutes without attacking. We are uncertain what to make of this. Entry 31, Species Catalog. Designation, Sky-Eater. Classification, Megafauna Predator Aerial. The Sky-Eater has a wingspan of approximately 16 meters. It nests in the upper cliff formations of the Kalos 9 mountain ranges and hunts in the plains and valleys below. It is capable of achieving speeds of over 300 kilometers per hour in a dive. Its primary hunting method is a strike-and-carry technique. It impacts prey at speed, uses momentum to break structural integrity, then carries the body to altitude for consumption. Our atmospheric drones were not specifically targeted. We believe the drones' heat signatures and movement patterns simply registered as prey. We have lost 9 drones to Sky-Eater strikes. Note added at Survey Day 102. The Sky-Eater appears to have a complex territorial vocalization system. The recordings are available in the supplementary file. They are, unexpectedly, quite beautiful. Several of our team members have found themselves listening to the recordings repeatedly during rest periods. Survey Director Kren has noted this may be a psychological response to extreme stress environments and has recommended mandatory rest rotations. There were 47 entries in total. Entry 47 covered a fungal organism that grew on the underside of rocks and released its spores when a heat-emitting body passed within 2 meters. The spores were individually harmless. In large quantities, they caused a cascade reaction in the respiratory systems of most species that resulted in rapid calcification of the bronchial passages. The Veth researchers named it Stonecough. The survey team member who discovered it did not survive the discovery. This was Kalos 9. This was the world into which, on the 14th day of the 3rd month of the 42nd Galactic Survey year, approximately 612 years before you're reading this, a man named Marcus Vale fell from a damaged transport vessel in a malfunctioning drop pod and survived the impact by the grace of a marsh bed, a slightly slower than predicted descent velocity, and whatever strange luck had apparently decided to make Marcus Vale its personal project. He was 29 years old. He was a mid-ranking biological research specialist attached to the Galactic Survey Corps as a human liaison officer. His primary qualification, listed in his personnel file, was adaptive field methodology, which is bureaucratic language for gets things done when nothing is going according to plan. His psychological evaluation from 6 months prior described him as follows. Subject displays above-average stress tolerance, unconventional problem-solving orientation, and a notable tendency to become more focused under high-pressure conditions rather than less. Some concern has been noted by supervisors regarding subject's apparent underestimation of personal risk. Subject has been counseled on this point on 3 separate occasions. Subject appears to have listened attentively and retained very little. His commanding officer, Commander Deathworld, a vet of considerable experience and what I can only describe as extremely well-developed survival instincts, had filed a supplementary note at the bottom of that evaluation. It read, "Vale is the most dangerous kind of human, the kind that doesn't know when to stop." She meant it as a warning. In retrospect, it was a prophecy. The transport vessel was the GSC Ember Run, a mid-class supply ship running a standard corridor route. The incident that caused the emergency drop pod deployment was a navigational failure, a cascade error in the jump calculation system that brought the ship out of transit approximately 340,000 kilometers from the intended exit point and directly into the debris field surrounding Kalos 9 outer orbit. 3 crew members were injured in the initial collision. The ship's main drive was damaged. And Marcus Vale, who had been in the equipment hold doing an inventory check, because he had insisted on doing an inventory check rather than sitting in the passenger cabin with everyone else, because that was apparently the kind of person he was caught near the emergency drop pod bay when the hull breach alarm sounded. The breach was in the bay behind him. He had approximately 4 seconds to make a decision. He made it. The pod launched. The Ember Run completed emergency repairs 17 hours later, located Vale's emergency beacon on the Kalos 9 surface, and immediately transmitted a distress request to the nearest Galactic Survey Corps relay station. The station relayed the request to the Regional Assembly. The Regional Assembly consulted its files on Kalos 9. The Regional Assembly then held what I can only describe as a very quiet, very uncomfortable meeting. I have the minutes of that meeting. They're part of the archive. I've read them many times, and every time I read them, I find myself sitting with a complicated feeling that I don't have a precise word for in Keth. It's something between sorrow and fury, and something that, if I were human, I might call shame. The meeting lasted 4 hours. The first hour was spent reviewing the Kalos 9 casualty record. The second hour was spent reviewing the available rescue options. The third hour was spent reviewing the probability assessments for those rescue options. Specifically, the probability that a rescue team could reach the surface, locate Vale, extract him, and return to orbit without casualties. The assessment prepared by the Assembly's top risk analysis division was as follows. Given current Kalos 9 surface conditions, seasonal predator activity patterns, and the beacon location's proximity to a confirmed Gravback population zone, the probability of a successful extraction with 0 additional casualties is assessed at approximately 4.3%. The probability of a successful extraction with 1 or 2 additional casualties is assessed at 11.7%. The probability of a failed extraction with multiple casualties is assessed at 84%. The fourth hour of the meeting was spent deciding what to do. They decided not to send a rescue team. They decided instead to maintain the beacon signal, continue monitoring, and this is in the minutes, written plainly, with the careful language of people who have learned to make terrible things sound reasonable. Await natural resolution of the situation. Natural resolution. That was how the Regional Assembly of the Galactic Survey Corps decided to document leaving a human being alive on the most dangerous planet in the Vest Corridor. Natural resolution. I want to note for the record that the vote was not unanimous. 3 Assembly members voted against the decision. One of them, a Sorani named Drevosh, filed a formal protest and then filed a resignation. I found her resignation letter in the supplementary files. It was 4 words long. You should be ashamed. She was right. Part 2, what the sensors saw. Here is what the Assembly did do. They kept the orbital monitoring array running. They hadn't turned it off anyway. Kalos 9's surface was a continuous source of research data, and the monitoring array fed passive observation readings to the survey database automatically. What this meant practically was that they had eyes on the surface. They had sensors. They had real-time atmospheric analysis, seismic readings, heat mapping, audio collection. They had a record. A complete, continuous, accidentally thorough record of everything that happened to Marcus Vale from the moment his drop pod hit the Kalos marsh to the moment, 31 days later, when a rescue vessel finally arrived. I have that record. All of it. It is approximately 600 hours of sensor data, audio recordings, and automated analysis logs. It also includes 17 personal log entries that Vale recorded on his suit's audio system, apparently for the purpose of having something to do with his hands while he thought. I've spent 4 years with this material. I know it the way I know my own memories now. Let me walk you through it. Day 1. The pod hit the marsh at approximately 14:00 local time. Kalos 9 has a 26-hour day cycle, warmer than standard, with a thick atmospheric haze that turns the sky a greenish-yellow color that Vale later described as the exact color of a headache. The impact was hard but survivable. The marsh absorbed most of the kinetic energy. Vale was unconscious for approximately 22 minutes, then came to in a pod that was slowly sinking into the marsh bed and filling with greenish water from a crack in the lower seal. His first recorded words on his suit's audio log were, "Okay, okay, okay." He said it 6 times, just that word. Okay, like he was running a check, like okay was a box he needed to tick before he could move on to the next thing. Then he said, suit integrity 17%, right collarbone something's wrong, beacon active, water knee level and rising, pod going down, time to go. He went. He pulled himself out through the emergency hatch, dragged his equipment bag out behind him, and spent the next 40 minutes wading through chest-deep marsh water to reach solid ground. He did this with a fractured collarbone. He didn't mention the pain in the log. The atmospheric sensors registered his elevated respiration and heart rate. He didn't talk about those either. When he reached solid ground, he sat down. He looked around. He said, "All right, so, let's figure out what's actually going on." And then he started taking inventory. What he had dragged from the pod in the equipment bag. His suit at 17% integrity and dropping slowly as the breach in the right shoulder seal continued to expand. His field analysis kit containing sample collection tools, a portable atmospheric analyzer, and a biological threat assessment scanner. 3 days of nutrient paste. His personal audio log device, a hand flare. A length of thermal cord he'd apparently put in his own bag for reasons he didn't explain, and that are listed in his personnel file as personal discretion field loadout, a folding multi-tool, and a small data reader preloaded with the Kalos 9 preliminary survey files. He had the files. He'd read them before the mission. He'd read them because he always read the files. That was another thing his supervisors had noted. Vale read everything. Thoroughly, before, during, and after. He was the kind of researcher who read the footnotes, who read the supplementary files, who read the notes that researchers added at the bottom of entries after things had gone wrong. He'd read the note about the Thread Vipers being curious. He'd read the note about the Sky Eaters, about their territorial vocalization system. He'd read all 47 entries. He started making decisions based on what he'd read. The first decision was shelter. Not because he was cold, Kalos 9's surface temperature was within his suit's tolerance, but because the open marsh was exposed, and the preliminary survey files had noted that open terrain was where the gravbacks primarily hunted. He needed elevation change, something with walls, something that would make a gravback's seismic hunting instinct less useful. He found rock formations approximately 2 kilometers east of the marsh. The sensor log tracked him moving there steadily, with rests every 20 minutes, for the collarbone almost certainly, though he didn't say so. He moved at the edge of the marsh rather than through it, keeping to the softer, sponge moss-covered ground. He'd read the survey note about foot vibration and gravback detection. He walked softly. The seismic sensors registered a gravback pack approximately 3 kilometers north of his position for the entirety of that first afternoon. The gravbacks did not come south. Vale reached the rock formations at dusk, found a shallow overhang deep enough to shelter under, and spent 30 minutes assessing it for Thread Viper access points before he settled in. He found 2 gaps he didn't like. He packed them with marsh clay from his boots, pressing it in methodically. Then he sat down, ate half a portion of nutrient paste, and recorded his second log entry. Day 1, I'm on Kalos 9. Pod is gone. Suit integrity is going to be a problem in the medium term. Collarbone is cracked, not separated. I can feel the difference, and it moves right if I keep it immobile, which I will. Beacon is active. Someone knows I'm here. I found shelter in the rock formation sector, the preliminary files designated as Zone C. I'm avoiding the primary hunting corridors mentioned in the Veth team's notes. The Gravback pack to the north is either ignoring me or hasn't found me yet. I'm going to try to keep it that way. The Thread Vipers, I sealed the gaps. I'll check in the morning. The atmosphere, I have a headache, it's not bad. Feels like a long day, not like something wrong. Okay, tomorrow I need water and I need to figure out the plant situation. The survey files list 17 edible species and 32 toxic ones. I read them. I'll need to confirm visually, but I think I can manage that. I'm going to be fine. I know that sounds ridiculous given where I am. But I'm going to be fine. I just need to pay attention. He paid attention. That is, in the end, the simplest summary of everything that followed. Marcus Vale paid attention in the way that most organisms, most intelligent organisms, simply don't bother to do when they're frightened. Fear narrows focus. Fear makes you look at the thing that's trying to hurt you and nothing else. Fear makes you loud and fast and reactive. Vale wasn't exactly fearless. The physiological data from his suit's biometric tracker shows elevated cortisol throughout the first week. His heart rate ran high. He slept in short intervals, 4 hours at most, always with his back to solid rock. But he observed. Even while afraid, he observed. He watched, he recorded, he thought. And Kalos 9, which had never had a patient, careful, reading the footnotes kind of observer on its surface before, began to reveal things it had never revealed to anyone. Day 3. The Thread Vipers found him. Not in his shelter, the clay packing held, but outside in the early morning when he went to collect dew water from the broadleaf plants that grew along the rock base. 2 of them came out of a crack in the rock approximately 2 meters to his left. He froze. Completely, totally, mid-crouch with his hand extended toward the leaf. The sensor audio caught his breathing going very quiet. The Thread Vipers were, and the sensor imaging confirmed this, looking at him, in the way that things without conventional eyes look. Their bodies oriented toward his heat signature, their heads moving in slow, side-to-side arcs that the survey files described as threat assessment behavior. Vale didn't move for 11 minutes. He'd read the note. Curious. He'd read it, and he'd held it, and when the Thread Vipers appeared, that word was apparently the first thing his brain served up, because his log entry that evening described his thinking with what I can only describe as the calm of a man who has committed entirely to a theory and decided to live or die by it. They weren't attacking, they were looking. I went with the Veth researcher's note curiosity, not aggression, as default state. I didn't move, I didn't make sudden sounds, I breathed slowly. After about 8 minutes, one of them came closer. Came to maybe 40 centimeters from my left boot, just oriented, head moving. I stayed still. It touched my boot with the side of its head. Not a strike, something else. Testing maybe, or I don't know, something else. Then it went back into the crack. Both of them went back into the crack. I collected the water. I think the key thing is that they're not automatically aggressive. The survey team lost people because of protocol, full biosafety gear, moving quickly, unpredictable thermal readings from the suit cooling system cycling. From a Thread Viper's perspective, that probably looked like a threat display, not a neutral encounter. I'm going to keep not being threatening. I'm going to see what happens. What happened was that the Thread Vipers came back. The next morning, the same 2, from the same crack. And the morning after that. And the morning after that. By day 7, Vale had stopped freezing when they appeared. He moved slowly when they were present, kept his body orientation non-confrontational, and occasionally sat near the crack and simply waited. His day 7 log entry. They're coming out even when I haven't triggered it by approaching. They're just coming out to look at me. I'm fairly convinced this is social behavior of some kind. I'm not in the literature they left us. I'm something new, and they're treating me the way curious animals treat new things. I named the one that came closest first. I know that's not scientific. I named it anyway. Her name is Rue, short for the one with the distinctive scarring on the left jaw that I noticed on day 4 when she came within 15 centimeters of my face, while I was sitting against the rock wall, and I had to remind myself quite firmly not to panic. I think she likes the warmth. I generate more heat than the rocks. I'm going to try something tomorrow. Day 8. He extended his hand. Slowly, palm up. The log doesn't explain why he thought this was a good idea, but his later debriefed testimony fills in the gap. Everything I'd read about the thread vipers suggested they were heat seekers. Warmth was neutral or positive in their behavioral response system. I was a warm thing that had been consistently non-threatening for a week. I thought the hand might, I don't know, read as an offering rather than a threat. Rue came out of the crack, oriented toward his hand, came to within 5 centimeters. Then, after approximately 2 minutes of orientation behavior, she rested the side of her head against his palm. The audio log captured Vale saying, very quietly, in a voice that sounded like a man trying very hard not to make any sudden movements with his vocal cords either. "Oh, okay. Hello." It was on this day, day 8, that the orbital monitoring team's automated analysis system flagged the sensor feed as potentially malfunctioning and submitted an error report to the Survey Corps Technical Division. The error report read, "Anomalous surface behavior detected. Species previously catalogued as aggressive default exhibiting sustained non-aggressive contact behavior with human subject. Recommend sensor array diagnostic and recalibration." The technical division ran the diagnostic. The sensors were fine. Part 3, the GRAVBACKS. I want to take a moment here, as an archivist, as someone who has spent years with this material, to tell you something that the raw sensor data doesn't fully convey. There is a sound Kalos 9 makes before a storm. I mentioned this at the beginning. I wasn't being literary. There is an actual sound. It's subsonic at the edge of detection for most species' auditory equipment. The survey team's sensors had recorded it dozens of times, but hadn't isolated it as meaningful. It showed up in the data as background noise, categorized and filed and ignored. What nobody realized, until Marcus Vale's portable atmospheric analyzer recorded it on day 12, and he stayed up most of the night reviewing the audio files, was that this sound wasn't geological. It was biological. It was the gravbacks. The gravbacks were warning each other about the storm. Day 12 was when the first major storm hit Vale's location. The sensor array had tracked it coming for 6 hours, but Vale had no access to the orbital data. His suit's long-range comm was down, running only the beacon. He wouldn't have known the storm was coming. Except that on the morning of day 12, approximately 4 hours before the storm arrived, the ground started to vibrate. Not seismically, in a pattern, low rhythmic cycling. Vale recorded it with his atmospheric analyzer. He sat in his shelter and listened to the recording 4 times. Then he pulled up the gravback entry in the preliminary survey files and read it again. Read the line about subsonic pulses. Read the line about communication. Then he looked out of his shelter at the sky. He saw the greenish-yellow haze had deepened to something closer to brown at the horizon to the west. "Something's coming," he said in the log. "The gravbacks are saying something's coming. I need to find better shelter." He found it a deeper cave system in the rock formation, one he'd identified and mapped during his first days of careful observation. He moved into it with his equipment, with the clay-packed gaps resealed 40 minutes before the storm hit. The storm was extraordinary. The sensor data captures it. Wind speeds in excess of 300 kilometers per hour, driving rain that contained particulate matter sharp enough to strip paint from survey station panels. Lightning that hit the rock formation's Vale had been sheltering under every few minutes for 4 hours. The overhang where he'd been sleeping for 11 days was destroyed in the first hour. In the cave, Vale sat in the dark and recorded, "Storm, big one." The gravback signal was a warning. "I need to think about this." He thought about it. He thought about it for 4 hours while the storm raged, sitting in a cave with a fractured collarbone and thread vipers who had by now apparently decided he was a permanent and acceptable feature of the rock formation, because Rue and what he'd identified as at least 3 others had followed him into the cave and were curled against his legs for warmth. He thought about the fact that the Gravbacks communicated, that they communicated about coming danger, that they communicated with enough advance notice to find shelter. He thought about the fact that Kalos 9 was not a planet of random, chaotic violence. It was a planet of rules, specific, learnable, communicable rules, and the organisms that lived there had learned those rules. The Gravbacks, the Thread Vipers, the Sky Eaters, they had all learned to live in this place, and they had learned together, and they were, in ways the survey teams had never stopped being too terrified to notice, talking to each other. When the storm ended, Vale crawled out of the cave and looked at the wreckage of his original shelter. He said very quietly, "I need to talk to them." Day 14 through day 21 are the days that make xenobiologists argue at conferences. I've sat in on 3 of those conferences. I've watched researchers go red in the face. I've watched Veth scientists who have been studying interspecies communication for 100 years put their heads in their hands and make sounds I couldn't fully translate, but that seemed to mean something like, "This isn't possible." But it happened. The sensor data is complete. The audio is continuous. The analysis has been reviewed by every major xenobiology institution in the Galactic Research Collective. Marcus Vale learned to communicate with Gravbacks in 8 days. Not fluently, not precisely, but enough. Let me explain what he did. First, he listened. He took every recording he'd made since landing and went through them systematically, isolating the subsonic signals. His atmospheric analyzer wasn't designed for this. It was designed for chemical composition readings. But it had a frequency analysis function he used creatively, spending most of day 14 extracting audio data at ranges below normal detection thresholds. He built a frequency map, a rough one, crude by any scientific standard but functional. He identified what he could hear as patterns, the pre-storm signal first, then variations, shorter pulses that seemed to accompany specific times of day, longer, complex signals that seemed to correlate with the pack's movement patterns as tracked by the ground vibration data he'd been recording with his bootplate sensors. He mapped them to behaviors. He was doing this with the tools he had, in a cave, with a healing collarbone and thread vipers using him as a heat source, on a planet that had been classified as unsurvivable. On day 15, he started making sounds back. The atmospheric analyzer could produce audio output. It wasn't built for that either, but he'd spent 2 days figuring out how to route the frequency generation function through the speaker system. The output was rough, imprecise. The Gravback signals had complexities he couldn't fully replicate. But he replicated what he could. The first signal he produced was the pre-storm warning, the simplest, most regular pattern he'd identified. He produced it standing at the edge of the rock formation zone, facing north, at approximately the same time the Gravback pack produced their morning subsonic cycle. The sensor data caught the pack's response. They went quiet. For 47 seconds, the north sector produced no Gravback subsonic signal. Then one individual in the pack produced a very short pulse, clean, directed south. Toward him, I think, Vale recorded that evening, with what I can only describe as the careful excitement of a man who has learned to be extremely disciplined about his excitement. That they heard me. I think they know something different is here. I don't think they know what yet. Tomorrow I'm going to go closer. His commanding officer, when she heard the recording of this log entry approximately 3 weeks later, pressed both hands flat on her desk and stared at the wall for approximately 90 seconds before she said, "Of course he did." It was not said admiringly. Or rather, it was not only said admiringly. Day 16. Vale left the rock formation zone. He moved north slowly, across the open terrain between his shelter area and the northern sector where the Gravback pack hunted. He moved the way he'd learned to move on Kalos 9, soft-footed, steady-paced, no sudden changes in direction. He moved like the marsh grass moved, like part of the landscape. He was 2 kilometers from the pack when he stopped. He activated the analyzer's audio output. He produced the pre-storm warning signal. 3 seconds of it, clean as he could make it. Then he waited. The ground vibrated. The seismic sensors that the orbital array fed into showed the vibration pattern clearly. The Gravback pack had registered his signal. There was movement in the north sector. Then, after approximately 3 minutes of internal pack communication, the subsonic signals were going back and forth. The sensors showed it, complex and rapid, one individual separated from the group. It came south. Toward him. A Gravback, for those who have not seen one, is not a creature that inspires calm thoughts. Even in still images, they have a quality that most species' brains register as too large. The mind refuses initially to correctly scale what it's seeing. 7 tons, basalt-plated, moving on 6 legs with a ground-eating stride that looks deceptively slow and covers distance at alarming speed. No visible eyes. The head is wide and low, and it sweeps left and right with a slow, scanning motion that is actually the creature reading the ground vibration through its sensory feet. The individual that came toward Vale on day 16 was, the sensor data suggests, a mid-ranking adult. Not the largest in the pack, not the smallest. The one they sent to investigate the strange signal from the south. It came to within 40 meters of Vale. Stopped. Swept its head. Read the ground vibration of a single human standing still, breathing quietly, heart rate elevated. The biometric data shows 147 beats per minute, but not moving. Vale produced the signal again. The Gravback responded. It produced a signal Vale hadn't heard before. Short, clear, single pulse. He recorded it. He analyzed it that night. He cross-referenced it against every signal he'd cataloged. It appeared in the catalog in 2 contexts. When pack members acknowledged each other at the beginning of a day cycle, and when a younger pack member returned successfully from a first solo hunt. He'd done his best translation work on that signal, and his best translation was this. Acknowledged, present, you exist. I think, his day 16 log says, in the tone of a man sitting very quietly with a large feeling he hasn't fully decided how to hold yet. They're saying hello. I'm going to say it back tomorrow. Days 17 through 21 are the documentation of a process that should, by any reasonable assessment, have been impossible. Vale established a recurring contact routine with the Gravback pack. He went north every morning at the same time, produced the same opening signal, waited for the scout individual. He named him Stone, because that was what he looked like to come south, and they had exchanges. Exchanges is the right word, not conversations, not communication in any rich sense, but an exchange of signals back and forth within a context that both parties were beginning to share. By day 19, Stone was coming to within 15 meters. By day 20, the pack had stopped producing alert signals when Vale moved through the northern edge of the terrain below their hunting ground. By day 21, Vale sat on a rock in the morning sun and ate half a portion of nutrient paste, while Stone stood 12 meters away and oriented toward him, and neither of them did anything alarming. The orbital sensor audio caught Vale saying quietly between bites, I think we've got an arrangement, buddy. Stone produced a low, single-pulse signal. Vale had cataloged that one too. Best translation, I hear you. Part 4, the SKYATRS. The Sky Eater incident happened on day 23. I want to be careful how I tell this part, because there's a version of this story that makes it sound like Vale was performing some kind of calculated heroism. Like he saw the problem, assessed it, made a plan, and executed it with superhuman calm. That's not what the audio log shows. What the audio log shows is a man who was running on very little sleep, a healing but still painful collarbone, dwindling nutrient paste, and the particular kind of stubborn mental energy that comes from having committed to surviving something so completely that stopping starts to feel less like dying and more like an administrative failure. He wasn't superhuman. He was just persistent and paying attention. And by day 23, he knew Kalos 9 in a way that nobody else ever had, because nobody else had spent 23 days being careful instead of frightened. The Sky Eater came from the east at approximately mid-morning. The survey file's description of their speed, 300 kilometers per hour in a dive, is, I want to note, technically accurate and also completely fails to prepare you for what it looks like on sensor imaging. The Sky Eater drops out of the upper atmospheric layer like something being thrown, not like something flying. The sound arrives almost simultaneously with the visual, a bone-level compression wave that the audio logs captured as a burst of static before the recording system recalibrated. Vale was in the open. He'd been moving between the rock formation and the northern terrain for his morning contact with Stone, and he was in the open stretch between the two, and the Sky Eater came out of the east directly at him. His biometric data at the moment of visual acquisition, 181 beats per minute. Respiration, sharp and rapid. The suit's stress indicator, which he'd largely ignored for 3 weeks because it was consistently orange, went red. He had approximately 4 seconds. The preliminary survey files on Sky Eaters. Its primary hunting method is a strike-and-carry technique. It impacts prey at speed, uses momentum to break structural integrity, then carries the body to altitude for consumption. He had 4 seconds, and he'd read the file. He'd also read the supplementary note. The one the Veth researcher had added about the vocalization system, about the territorial calls, about how the recordings were beautiful and how the survey team members had found themselves listening to them repeatedly. He'd listened to them. He'd listened to them because he read everything, and the supplementary files included the recordings, and he'd been in a cave in a storm and he'd had time, and so he'd listened. He knew what a Sky Eater sounded like when it called. He had 4 seconds. He made a sound. The audio log is very clear. In the midst of what the biometric data tells us was maximum physiological stress response, Marcus Vale produced a sound with his voice that the frequency analysis system identifies as a rough approximation of a Sky Eater territorial boundary call. It wasn't perfect. The human vocal range doesn't reach all the registers involved, but it was close enough. The Sky Eater pulled up. Not a full abort. It was committed too far into the dive for a full abort. But it flared its wings, bled speed, and the strike that would have hit Vale at full velocity instead clipped the top of his equipment bag with a glancing blow that knocked him sideways and tore the bag's outer strap. He hit the ground. He lay flat. He made the sound again. The Sky Eater wheeled overhead, circling. Its own call came back, the sensor audio captured it, rich and complex, the full version of what Vale had been attempting with human vocal cords. Vale made the sound a 3rd time. The Sky Eater circled twice more. Then it climbed. It went back up into the upper layer, east, away. Vale lay on the ground for approximately 2 minutes. Then he said, "Okay, that worked. I need to note that down before I forget what exactly I did, because I'm currently running about 40% on adrenaline and 20% on confusion about why I'm still breathing." He recorded himself recreating the sound 3 times for the notes. His log entry that evening: Sky Eater territorial call used defensively, successful with caveats. The caveats are: 1. It only barely worked. 2. I'm not going to be in the open at mid-morning anymore. And 3. I now have a bruise on my left hip that goes from approximately the waist to the knee, and I'd prefer not to repeat the experience. The sounds work. The survey team was right that they're beautiful. There's something in the lower registers that I don't think I can reproduce, but that I can feel when I try, like it's meant to go in the chest rather than the throat. I need to learn the boundary call better. If I'm going to be out in the open between the Rock Zone and the North Territory, I need it to be reliable. He spent the next 3 evenings in the cave, listening to the recordings he'd made of the Sky Eater's calls and practicing. The Thread Vipers, apparently, were unbothered by this. Rue curled around his ankle while he practiced. Part 5, the rescue. The GSC Meridian Reach was the vessel the assembly finally dispatched on day 28. I want to be precise about the timeline here, because the timeline matters. The assembly voted to leave Vale on day 1. They maintained that position through day 7, when the first sensor data showing Thread Viper contact behavior came in. The technical division submitted another malfunction report. The Xenobiology division submitted a cautious observation memo. The assembly noted the memo and maintained its position. On day 16, when the Gravback contact data came through, when the sensor array clearly showed a human standing in the open terrain producing subsonic signals at a Gravback pack, and the Gravback pack responding with non-aggressive behavior, the assembly held another meeting. That meeting lasted 6 hours. At the end of it, they voted to dispatch a rescue vessel. The vote was 11-4. The 4 who voted against rescue were not against saving Vale. They were against disturbing what they were watching. This is also in the minutes. One of those 4 was a xenobiologist named Prenash who submitted a supplementary note that read, "I understand the urgency of extraction. I also want it noted that what is currently occurring on the Kalos 9 surface is scientifically unprecedented, and we are about to interrupt it. I am voting for extraction. I am doing so with significant reluctance." The Meridian reached Kalos 9 orbit on day 28 and began the approach on day 29. The rescue team was 6 individuals. 2 Veth extraction specialists, a Sorani medic, 2 human survey corps officers. They'd specifically requested humans, on the theory that if Vale had somehow achieved coexistence with the local fauna, the human physiological signature might provide some protective effect. And the mission commander, a Keth named Vessel Commander Orang Kreth, who I later interviewed for this archive and who gave me the most precise description of what they found that I've been able to locate in any source. "We had the sensor data," Orang Kreth told me. "We'd watched the recordings. We'd been briefed by the Xenobiology Division. We believed we understood what we were walking into. We did not understand what we were walking into. The sensor data can't give you the physical reality of standing there, of standing on Kalos 9 and having it be quiet. Not silent, but quiet in the way a place is quiet when the things that usually fill it with threat sounds have decided to hold still. We came in from the east, which was the approach vector the extraction specialists recommended as lowest risk. We set down in the eastern plain, approximately 3 kilometers from the beacon location, and we moved toward it on foot. 2 kilometers in, one of the extraction specialists stopped and grabbed my arm. He pointed north. There was a gravback watching us. Standing still, head oriented toward us, not approaching, just watching. The extraction specialist had a pulse weapon half drawn before I stopped him. I didn't know why I stopped him. I don't know even now whether it was the right instinct or just a frozen reaction. But something about the way it was standing didn't read as the prelude to an attack. It read as assessment. It watched us for approximately 2 minutes. Then it turned and went north. We kept walking. They found Vale at the rock formation. He was sitting outside his cave. He'd extended and improved it considerably over 3 weeks, had walled part of the entrance with stacked stones, had established a clear sightline to the north and east, eating the last of his nutrient paste, and talking quietly into his audio log. He had thread vipers around him, 3 visible ones curled in the sun near the cave entrance, not moving, not alarmed. He saw the rescue team coming approximately 400 meters out. He stood up. He said something they couldn't hear at that distance. Then he turned and spoke to something behind him. The medic, Sorani trained with good hearing, heard a low tone rather than words, something produced in the chest, and the thread vipers went into the cave. He walked out to meet them. Orang Kreth's account. He looked not the way people look when they've been alone and in danger for a long time. He looked like someone who had been working, hard, continuously. He was thinner, and there was something about the collarbone that I noticed immediately as a Keth. We have good structural sight, but his eyes were clear, and his attention was completely present. He shook hands with both human officers. He made the kind of physical greeting gesture that Veth use, the shoulder acknowledgement, to the extraction specialists, which surprised them considerably. He gave me a formal Keth nod. He said, "I want to do a proper handover before we leave. There are things you need to know about this site, and I need to make sure someone has the information." I said, "You want to do a handover?" He said, "Yes. I've got 31 days of direct observation data, behavioral mappings for 3 species, and a contact protocol that's been working reliably for 15 days. I don't want it to disappear just because I'm leaving. I'd hate for the next team to start from scratch." Orang Kreth told me this part slowly. She had a habit, I noticed in our interview, of pausing when she reached moments that had affected her significantly, holding the memory for a moment before offering it. "He wanted to make sure the next team had what they needed," she said. "He was thinking about the next team. He was standing on the most dangerous planet in the Vest corridor with a fractured collarbone, and he was thinking about the research continuity. I want to be honest about this. I didn't understand humans very well at that point. I'd worked with them in professional contexts for many years. I thought I understood them reasonably. I was wrong. I had read the preliminary survey assessment, the one that said humans experienced only a mild headache from the atmospheric compounds. I'd read it and moved on because what did that matter? The planet was still deadly by every other measure. But standing there, watching this human want to do a handover, I started to understand something the assessment hadn't actually stated, but that the data implied. Humans don't just resist the atmosphere. They resist the fear. The neurological disruption the atmospheric compounds cause, it primarily affects the amygdala-equivalent structures in most species, the threat processing center, the part of the brain that takes sensory input and translates it into dread. In humans, that translation just runs differently. They feel the danger, they feel it fully, and then they keep going anyway. I have thought about that many times since. I think it's both the most remarkable and the most unsettling thing I know about them. The handover took 45 minutes. Vale walked the rescue team through his contact protocols for the Thread Vipers, demonstrated the approach posture, the thermal neutrality behavior, the meaning of the different orientation displays, showed them which gaps in the rock formation the Thread Vipers used as regular access points, which ones to leave clear, and which ones had been sealed. He walked them to the edge of the northern terrain and produced the morning acknowledgement signal for Stone. Stone came south. The rescue team stood very still. Stone came to 20 meters, oriented, produced his response signal, and returned north. One of the Human Survey Corps officers later described her reaction to this by saying, simply, "I've been with the Survey Corps for 15 years. I have never wanted to quit and become a xenobiologist as badly as I wanted to quit and become a xenobiologist in that moment." Vale showed them the Sky-Eater territorial call, walked them through the frequencies, the resonance, the physical placement in the chest rather than the throat. The medic recorded all of it. He showed them the storm warning signal, and the catalog he'd built of Gravback subsonic communication, and the behavioral maps he'd drawn on the flat stone surfaces of the cave wall with a piece of charcoal from a fire he'd made on day 6 with the thermal cord. The cave wall looked like a research station. Orenkreth, we had 1 hour of daylight left when we finally left the site. We moved back east toward the extraction vessel. Vale walked with us. We were approximately 1 kilometer from the vessel when I looked back. The Gravback pack, the full pack, not just Stone, had come south. They were standing at the edge of the northern terrain, just standing, looking south, toward us. Toward him. Vale looked back too. He stopped walking. He produced 3 signals, short measured, the ones he'd cataloged as the daily departure signal, the one that meant, as close as he could translate it, "I'm going, I was here, I heard you." The pack produced a response. All of them together. The ground vibrated with it. It went through my feet, through my legs, into my chest. I do not know what they said. Vale stood there for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, let's go." And he walked to the ship. He didn't look back again. I did. They watched until we lifted off. Part 6, What Came After. Marcus Vale spent 14 days in the Meridian Reach's medical bay having his collarbone properly set and fused, his suit breach exposure treated, and his nutritional deficiency addressed. He spent most of those 14 days recording, organizing, structuring the 31 days of data he'd collected into a usable format. He produced, in 14 days, what the Survey Corps Xenobiology Division later called the most significant single-author field document in the history of Kalos 9 research. It ran to approximately 460 pages and contained everything. Every signal catalog, every behavioral map, every protocol he'd developed, every failure and revision and observation. It was not a polished academic paper. It was a field journal, written in the way Vale apparently wrote everything, directly, practically, with a constant eye toward what the next person would need to know. The introduction read, "I'm writing this for whoever comes to Kalos 9 next. I know you've read the preliminary files. I know they're terrifying. But I want you to know something that the preliminary files couldn't tell you because the preliminary teams didn't have time to figure it out. This planet is not chaos. It has rules. They're learnable. They're consistent. And the organisms here are not your enemies. They're your neighbors. and like all neighbors, they respond better to understanding than to fear. Start with patience. Start with observation. Read the notes the Veth researchers added to their entries, especially the ones about Thread Viper curiosity and Sky Eater vocalization. Those notes are more important than the main text. You're going to be okay? I was okay. And I was there 31 days with a broken collarbone and 17% suit integrity and no orbital data access. You'll be fine. Pay attention. The document was circulated to every xenobiology division in the Galactic Research Collective within 8 weeks of the Meridian Reach's return. It caused, and I am not exaggerating here, something close to a crisis in the field. Not a bad crisis, the productive kind. The kind where the assumptions underlying 30 years of research are revealed to be not wrong exactly but incomplete, and everyone has to go back and look at what they thought they knew and ask what else they missed. The preliminary survey files were reanalyzed. Every entry was re-examined in the light of Vale's contact protocols. 3 species that had been classified as aggressive default were reclassified. 2 behavioral patterns that had been logged as random were identified as communication sequences. The Gravback subsonic catalog Vale had compiled became the foundational text of a new subdiscipline, subtectonic interspecies communication studies, that now has its own academic journal and an annual conference.